Yeah, go ahead. It's good to see you again.
Hey.
Oh yeah, so I think we're gonna split. I think I'll start half hour, and then I'll pass it over to Kira, and then we're gonna leave some time for questions.
Mhm.
Kira Vanderbrandt, could you give me a wave if I hit 30 minutes? Because I want to make sure I don't. Okay, cool. So I am going to be talking about half-hour comedy story structure, and I know a lot of you are not writing half hours, but I want to pass on to you a tool that my wife and I use and that we've used for about 20 years writing everything that we've written. And it's not just for half hour. My wife and I have written kind of everything. I started out in kids animation. I moved on to kids sketch TV, kids live action. And then for the last 20 years, I think I've been writing broadcast network comedy. So I've written half hour, multi-camera. I've sold pilots. I've sold hour-long pilots and features. And recently, my wife and I sold a country music musical to Paramount. Last year, I had a 4-month consulting gig with Amblin with 2 other writers working with Steven Spielberg to break a movie. And we're currently working for a studio that doesn't like us to mention who they are, but they have a bouncing lamp as their logo. So if you could put that together. And the only reason I bring that up is because I want you to know that this tool I want to pass on to you, and when I also get into half-hour structure, is something we use on every single one of these things. And I find it absolutely crucial for breaking story. And so the tool that I learned it in one of the first classes when I moved out to Los Angeles. And there was a guy named Bill Idelson, and he was an old-time sitcom writer. He wrote for MASH. I think he was an actor, and he ran a show called Love American Style. And in day one, he was like, who can define what a story is? And we all tried, and he was like, I can do it in 3 words. And none of us could guess it. And he said, those 3 words are hero, obstacle, and goal. And I'm going to walk you through all of that because I didn't realize it at the time. It was the most profound thing that I now use all the time. And you get a special treat because I'm going to share my screen, and I made my first PowerPoint presentation ever. So this might be a complete disaster if I accidentally show you all my personal photos or something. So wait, here we go. Okay, so here we go. Hero, obstacle, goal, right? So what he taught us is that there is no story if you do not have all 3 things and all 3 things active. And he even had like this amazing little drawing that he put up on the board that I still draw. This is my notebook that I'm currently working on my current story with, and I've got it written on the front of that. And it's this. There's your hero. This particular one has a little backpack because he's off on whatever adventure he's on for his story. There's a hero, the goal, which is this little sunshine thing, and then the obstacle, which is this active triangle pointing in opposition to the hero and what that hero wants. Those 3 elements are the foundation of every story that you will ever watch or read. And you don't have a story unless you have all 3 of those things. And so I want to walk you through trying hero, obstacle, goal. Try a story without an obstacle. So you picture John, I'm the hero because I'm the guy talking right now, and I want to go to Ohio. That's not a story, right? That is a fact about me, is that I want to go to Ohio. If I were to add then, I'm John the hero, I want to go to Ohio, but it's 3,000 miles away. Suddenly in that but, and I don't know if you feel it, it becomes a story. It becomes, there's something to overcome in order to get my goal, right? So I'm John, I want to get to Ohio, but it's 3,000 miles away. And the I want is that but. It's when you're telling a story, I was going to go to France, but I had to do this to get over that. Having that but is crucial. And just to kind of walk through the rest of this, you don't have a story without a goal either. So I'm John the hero, and Ohio is 3,000 miles away. Like, that's just like a geography lesson. There's nothing in that at all until I have all 3 elements working. So it's all about the I want, and the I want is your goal, and your protagonist has to express that in some form. And until they do, there's absolutely no story. And so every story has got to start with a character wanting something, but with an obstacle. And this is so important that in musicals, there's literally, this is where it's going to get really interesting because I'm going to try to play a video, but there's literally usually the second song of the night in a musical movie. It's usually the second or third song is literally called the I Want song. And I'm just going to play a very short clip for you. Can you guys hear it?
Where the people are. I wanna see them dancing, walking around on those, what do you call it? Oh, feet.
That is literally the protagonist saying, I want to walk around on feet, but I'm a fucking mermaid. And that is what that story is, from that introduction of this character to the end when she finally achieves that goal. I lost my cursor, sorry. I'm going to give you a couple examples here, not that one. Here's another one. This is from Coco.
No music. No music. I think we're the only family in Mexico who hates music. And my family's fine with that. But me? Be back by lunch, Miko. Love you, Mama. Like the rest of my family. Hola, Miguel. Hola.
It's I want to perform music for people, but my family hates music. It's that simple. And it's about a desire that I have that is the opposite of what my family's desire is for me. And then one other clip here that is about another little boy who had that same problem.
How do you do that?
My father made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
What was that?
Luca Brazzi held a gun to his head, and my father assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on the contract. It's a true story. That's my family, kid. Not me.
That clip was way too long, but I just wanted to show you that the little boy in Coco and Michael had the exact same I want an obstacle, which is I want to be different from my family, but it's in my blood to be like my family, and I must fight against that. And when you start looking for that, you're going to notice every movie, every TV show sets up these three elements almost immediately. And to the point, and this is a very short one of my favorite movies, adaptation. This is under the opening credits.
Do I have an original thought in my head? My bald head. Maybe if I were happier, my hair wouldn't be falling out. Life is short. I need to make the most of it. Today's the first day of the rest of my life. I'm a walking cliche.
It's a movie about someone who wants to write an original movie, and the obstacle is they feel that they are writing a cliche movie or that they are a living cliche. And that movie gets into this whole meta thing where the only way to solve the problem in that movie becomes this sort of thing where the movie itself is playing into all the tropes and cliches that this character doesn't want to get into. But my big point is that it's hero, obstacle, goal, and it's almost immediately when you meet that main character, that's what they want. So if it takes a hero, an obstacle, and a goal to build the story, the rule that my wife and I always use is to heighten your story, you have to heighten those elements, goal and obstacle, and able to heighten the story. So I'm going to walk through this again and just sort of show you the way we would do this is I'm John the hero. I want to go to Ohio, but it's 3,000 miles away, right? So what if we up the goal a little bit? I'm John the hero. I want to get to Ohio to get $2 million, but it's 3,000 miles away. So already it's a little bit more interesting. Okay, well, there's a bigger goal. And if we up the obstacle, I'm John, the hero. I want to get to Ohio to get $2 million, but it's 3,000 miles away and I can't use an airplane. So suddenly it's like, okay, this is starting to feel, I can see some scenes. It feels like this might be an action movie or this might be a road movie of some sort. So if we just keep going, I'm John, the hero. I want to get to Ohio to get $2 million. I need to save my daughter's life. Hold on, I gotta move this. But it's 3,000 miles away. I can't use an airplane because a man is at the airport and wants to stop me. So suddenly this is getting kind of interesting here. It's starting to shape up just by increasing the goal and the obstacle. So let's do it one more time. I'm John the hero. I want to get to Ohio to get $2 million. I need to save my daughter's life because in the future she will save all of mankind if she survives. But it's 3,000 miles away. I can't use an airplane because a man is at the airport and wants to stop me. And he's a cyborg programmed to kill my daughter at all costs so the world can end. And that's obviously a weird Ohio-based kind of version of the Terminator, right? Reese's goal is to save Sarah Connor. What's the obstacle? The Terminator. And if you look at the perfection of this movie, because this movie is basically mainlined story. Reese's goal, save Sarah Connor, obstacle, Terminator. Terminator's goal, and it should work for every character that is driven in your movie or TV show, the Terminator's goal is to kill Sarah Connor, and that obstacle is Reese. And then Sarah Connor's goal is to stay alive. The obstacle is there's a Sarah Connor killing machine. But if you look at it, the protagonist and the antagonist have each other as their active obstacle. And when you can do that, to me, that's the chef's kiss of a story structure. Because what you've now done is you've made, it's a boxing match. The person who wants something is in direct opposition to an active goal that's trying to stop them from getting that. So how does this all kind of feed into like half-hour comedy structure, right? So I'm going to talk just a tiny bit about it because half hour is very structured. You've got 21 minutes and 30 seconds for broadcast network. You have commercial breaks you have to write to. So for the network, you have, basically now it used to be 2 acts with the commercial in the middle, and then it became 3 acts and a tag or a cold open, which is sort of cold open commercial, and then 3 acts. And then most recently, when my wife and I were working at ABC about 1.5 years ago, they were calling it 4 pods of content. So what they wanted was 4 pods of content that they could put commercials between. But what that meant is you had act breaks in half-hour structure, which is your act break is where you then lead into a commercial. And one of the most important things in a television script is when you get to that commercial act break moment, you want that sense of the story that you can't turn away from, because ultimately that's what you're trying to do is keep people from changing the channel during that. And so that's why that's set up that way. In streaming, the structure, while they don't do an act break for, say, they won't say act 1 and then start act 2. Usually you don't even call them out. It's more like a feature script. But the structure for a half hour is still going to work along the lines of what you're looking at with the half-hour comedy structure. And the thing I want to point out with it is when you're talking about 4 pods of content, I know you guys have talked feature structure. A feature is basically 4 pods of content, more or less. You have act 1, the first half of act 2 up to your midpoint, the second half of act 2, and then act 3. And so what I always think of is I'm building to 3 major changes in the story that I'm gonna flip it on its edge, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna escalate that goal and that obstacle at each of those points. Because to me, and I fully believe this, a half-hour comedy is basically a tension building device, because comedy comes to life with tension. That's where you're gonna find the funny. That's where you're gonna want to build the most. And so how do you build up the tension? It's if you get notes from a network executive, you are going to hear the words up the stakes again and again and again. And what that means is they want it to matter more. They want it to feel like it matters more and more to that main character. And when it matters more, that obstacle has to be bigger, and you start to get more and more tension. And so the way that my wife and I always up those stakes is we up that obstacle and goal as we work our way to each act break. So what I thought I would do is walk you through an episode of a television show and sort of how that works in practice. And so there's this show called My Name is Earl, which my guess is most of you haven't seen. It has this great intro back when you had 30-second intros that told the story of the show. So I'm going to play this for you and then talk to you on the other side.
You know the kind of guy who does nothing but bad things and then wonders why his life sucks? Well, that was me. Every time something good happened to me, something bad was always waiting around the corner. Karma. That's when I realized I had to change. So I made a list of everything bad I've ever done, and one by one, I'm going to make up for all my mistakes. I'm just trying to be a better person. My name is Earl.
So the thing about My Name is Earl, I think that's my slideshow. 1 second.
You know the kind of
Nope.
guy who does nothing?
Stop. The thing about My Name is Earl that was so brilliant in that premise, and I hope you could hear it clear enough, is it's basically about kind of a hoodlum-like guy who always did bad things and nothing went his way. And then in the show, he found a lottery ticket. He went dancing out the street, got hit by a car, and the lottery ticket blew away. And he was watching Carson Daly one night, and Carson Daly, someone said, "Carson, your life is so great," to whoever Carson was, or whoever's interviewing Carson, said, "Your life is so great. Why is that?" And he said, "Well, I believe in karma. You do good things and good things happen." And Earl, who's high on morphine in the hospital, was like, "That's the secret to life. Do good things and good things will happen to you." And so he writes this list, and he's going to cross everybody off of it. And based on me hammering you with hero, obstacle, goal, it's probably not surprising to hear the premise alone is so brilliant. Greg Garcia created the show. That premise is already built in. Earl's our hero. His goal is to cross people off of that list. And the obstacle is he's done something horrible to that person that is going to make it really difficult for him to cross them off the list. It is pure hero, obstacle, goal just in the premise alone, which is why I think it's one of the best ways to step through what I'm talking about as far as breaking out an episode of television. So I'll dive into that. Are there any questions right now? I realize I'm blazing through this. I'll just keep going. It's very weird to be in Zoom right now. I just want to tell you that. You guys are used to this. I'm less used to it. Okay, so this episode of My Name is Earl. So I'm going to talk you through how it started and kind of listen for the hero, obstacle, and goal of the whole thing. But it starts off with Earl's ex-wife is carjacked at gunpoint. And as she's trying to get out of the car, she reaches back in to get her chicken nuggets, and the carjacker hits the gas, and her hand gets slammed in the door, and she's dragged down the street. And then we immediately cut to Earl and his dim-witted brother, Randy, and they're sitting in the back of an El Camino in lawn chairs drinking beers, and like glass bottles of beers. And the dim-witted brother says, "Hey, Earl, did you know that if you can pull the label off of your beer in one go without it ripping, it means you're not a virgin?" And Earl's kind of like, "Oh, really? Interesting." And he pulls it right off, no problem. Randy goes to pull it off, and it rips. And Randy says, "You know, I've slept with women, you stupid lying beer," right? That's his attitude. Just then, Joy comes dragging by in this car, still hanging from her arm. And Randy looks to Earl and says, "Huh, that's the best stunt I've seen since Sweet Johnny." And then we go close on Earl, who gets a worried look on his face and says, "Sweet Johnny," in voiceover. Sweet Johnny was on my list number whatever, and it's one of the things I felt the worst about. We go into a series of flashbacks about what Earl did to Sweet Johnny. And Sweet Johnny, it turns out, was a local stuntman, and he would do just ridiculous, dangerous stunts. And Earl had a crush on Sweet Johnny's girlfriend. And so Earl figured out if he convinced Johnny to do really dangerous stunts, Johnny would get more injured and will be laid up longer so Earl could have sex with his girlfriend, right? So that's this terrible thing. We had the best time coming up with like 5 examples where he set himself on fire. Earl convinces him to like blow himself up in a chair, all these terrible things. And you come back from that flashback and Earl says, "All right, Randy, I'm going to go get across Sweet Johnny off my list. Do you want to come?" And Randy says, "No, I'm going to go back to the bar and get another beer and prove to it I'm not a virgin," right? This all happens within the first, this is before not even like 4 minutes, 3 minutes in. And what we've set up, obviously, is Earl wants to cross off Sweet Johnny. He has done something horrible to Sweet Johnny, so you know that's his obstacle, is that guy's going to be pissed at him. Randy wants to prove to a beer that he's not a virgin. That's his goal, is to prove he's not a virgin to a beer. The obstacle is going to become ripping a label off of a beer. But it's set up in the very beginning. And then the very next scene in this one is Joy buys a gun. And she's going to protect herself from future carjackers. And her husband is against guns and says no good can come from guns. Joy's story is proving that there good can come from having a gun. You should have a gun, right? So that is set up in the first 4 minutes of that entire show, and really even quicker than that, where you know what these stories are about. So we've set up already hero, obstacle, goal in that episode of television, and you're not even aware that's exactly what we just did, but we did. So I'll just walk through the A story on this so you can kind of follow. So what do we do with that, right? That's our opening here. That's our kind of like the I wants. Everybody has now stated their I want. That's the first building block of the half hour. Someone wants something. And usually in a half hour television show, you have an A story, a B story, and a C story most often. The A story is obviously following the lead character, usually. The B story will be a combination of the other characters. And the C story is often a C runner, which is just like a really thin, it could just be something like someone pulling a label off of a beer to prove they're not a virgin. So something very small. And the reason I think that comes up is, one, you can break away from your A story so you don't get tired of it. For comedy, it's great because you can cut between scenes or stories. But also what you get is you get 5 or 6 regular actors who are all going to be really pissed off if they don't have a story every week. And so now what you've also created is like, yeah, maybe Earl is always the A story, but then Joy is the A story with them, Randy's the B. So, but typically you'll have the A, B, and C stories. So I'm going to walk you through the A and how we escalate this throughout. So basically it starts with the I want. So in Earl's case, this is I want to cross Johnny off my list. He ends up going over to Sweet Johnny's house, where he finds Sweet Johnny is like prepping for his next stunt. And this stunt's going to be, he's going to sit in a lawn chair and like ride a bunch of balloons up and then jump off of the parachute. And so when Earl gets there, Johnny's really excited to see him. And then Earl admits what happened, and Johnny loses his shit and starts freaking out and starts like shooting a staple gun or something at Earl and wants to beat the hell out of him. And Earl runs away and he says, okay, well, what I've learned is with the list, sometimes it's important to get people to calm down and then I can reapproach them. So he does that, So he does that. The next day he comes back and he finds Johnny preparing again for his big stunt. And Earl walks up, he's like, hey, Johnny. And then this guy, Johnny, has the exact same reaction he had the day before. You're seeing where this is going. And he basically is, Earl admits again, like, I feel like I think he ends up saying, I feel like because he feels a deja vu. And he says, I feel like I caught that French disease that makes things happen to you twice. But he breaks the news again that I slept with Sheila, your girlfriend. And this guy has the exact same reaction and tries to beat him. Earl runs away. And that's our first act break. And the escalation there is the obstacle is now harder than he thought. He thought it was going to be, I'm going to tell someone something and they're going to be able to tell me what they want. This is now something's wrong with Johnny and this is bizarre. There's a lot more to it than I thought. So that's our first act break, because that's the escalation both of the obstacle and now it's the goal too. He's got to double his efforts to get back to that. So act 2, now he needs to figure it out. I always call this the twisteroo, because if act 1, it's sort of the I want, and then I kind of have a cheat sheet of like, I want, try to get, sometimes it's try again, and then there's an act break, and then there's this twisteroo, right? So act 2, now you got to figure out what happened at that act break. I don't know what, that was crazy. And in this case, Earl finds Sheila, the girl that he was hooking up with, and then Sheila gives him some new information, and that's that Johnny, about a year after Earl had been messing with him, it was something ridiculous, like he was putting on a pair of leather pants and slipped and hit the back of his head, but now he can't make new memories. So it's that Adam Sandler movie disease where it's like, every morning he wakes up and it's a clean slate and he's got to start all over again. And I apologize for this, but at the time, what the room decided was, and we all decided, and it was funny, but it's like we needed a way to show the passage of time. And so what we decided is Sheila's ass had gotten gigantic, although the rest of her was the same. So that it was sort of, we were going to need something to prove to Johnny once Earl went to try to prove what was going on. And that's what we went with, right? So Earl's discovered this twisteroo, first scene after Act 2 starts. And so now it's a classic thing that happens in so many half hours, which is, we call it the what to do. And you go to your friends and you're like, what do I do? Here's this new information. And this is where, our hero can talk it out a little bit. It's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And in this case, one of Earl's friends says, you know what, just take the beating. Let him punch himself out on you, and then you'll be able to talk to him. And Earl's feeling is, you know what, I got into this problem by causing a lot of pain. Maybe I need to feel a lot of pain to get out of it. So he goes back with this idea of, I'm going to take my second attempt. So in that second attempt, now we got to raise the obstacle again, right? So he goes there and he talks to Johnny. He takes a terrible beating that goes on way longer than he thought. Johnny finally, you know, is worn out, and then Earl tells him what's going on. About, for the last 10 years, you've been living the same life again and again. Johnny doesn't believe it. So that can't possibly be true. I want to talk to Sheila. So he runs off to go talk to Sheila. Earl follows him. That's where Johnny sees Sheila. At first, he doesn't believe it. There's a lot of fun with him seeing like electric cars and people on cell phones, and, you know, it's freaking him out. And then he sees Sheila's, you know, has grown a lot, and he freaks out. It's like, oh my God, it's true. And goes running home, locks himself in his house, and chugs a bunch of NyQuil. So he's knocking himself out. That's our next act break. But what we've now established is, even when you tell this guy what's going on, now you realize he doesn't want this information. So how I've got to solve this problem. You know, so that's our next escalation. And Earl's goal is, again, redoubled. I've got to make up for, you know, it's the same goal. The goal and the obstacle, if you're noticing with all this, they never change, they escalate. And that's a really key thing, because if Earl suddenly was like, oh, well, I'll get another goal. Maybe instead I'll do this, the show's over. Like if Earl suddenly, or if suddenly he's like, well, you know what, I'll go to list item number 2. The episode's done. So he can't give up on that goal. And if Johnny no longer is the obstacle and that changes, then the episode's over also, because now he's dealing with a different problem. So it's crucial that that goal and that obstacle stayed the same and continue to build throughout the entire episode. So basically he discovers at this second act break, okay, well, this is going to take a lot more to get through it. And I've got to basically fight my way through another beating, another convincing him. This time I can't let him get that NyQuil, and I've got to fight through the end. So because this is just fun and repetition, the beginning of Act 3, you know, he goes through it all the way through Sheila, who's getting really tired of, you know, Earl showing up and all the butt jokes. And Earl chases him back, but he's ahead of him, so he stops him from drinking the NyQuil, breaks into the house with him, and the two of them, and he sits him out, and then the two of them have this moment where Johnny finally breaks free and it realizes, oh my God, I've done the same stunt again and again and again. And he can finally say, you know what, Earl, if you can let me do this stunt, even though I'll never know it, then I'll let you cross me off your list. Because it's pathetic to me that I'm doing this again and again and again. So please do that, right? Because it was fun to watch Earl tortured, we ended up having Johnny fall asleep again. So you get to go through it one more time. But at this point, Act 3 kind of has that breakthrough, right? And that's our first sequence of this third act, is sort of a breakthrough on the problem. And now he's going to attempt this solution. So Earl's feeling really good, and he's gathered Camden County around, all the local, the people from the bar. Everybody wants to see Sweet Johnny's stunt. And and he's standing there literally pen in hand. I'm ready to achieve my goal. And then he notices that, and Sweet Johnny's sitting in his chair with the balloons, and he's starting to cut the rope to fly up, and he's going to jump off with the parachute. And then Earl notices a parachute is stowed underneath Johnny's van. And he runs over and he says, Johnny, you forgot your parachute. And Johnny says, you know what, Earl, if this is how I'm living my life, I don't want to be alive. And he throws the parachute to the side, cuts the rope, and Earl jumps on, and now the two of them start floating away, you know, because Johnny's going to kill himself. And so this is where that B story comes in with Joy, who wanted a gun. I won't walk you through it, but there was a battle between her and her husband, where he kept trying to steal her gun, and then she would get another one, and the whole thing was having a gun is important, is what she said. So Earl and Johnny are floating away to their deaths, and then Joy is watching this happen and looks over to her husband. He's like, so you don't think there's any time when it would be good to have a gun? And her husband's like, no. She goes, even when these two guys are floating away, it should be nice to have a gun right now, wouldn't it? I could shoot out one of those balloons. And her husband's finally like, okay, fine. In a situation where two idiots are floating away in a balloon, one of them in a chair, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it would be good to have a gun then. And she goes, thank you, pulls a gun out of her pocket, shoots the balloon, and then they both come crashing down to the ground. And I think the joke was, this is America. You didn't think I could find another one? But, and so that, of course, knocks Johnny out. And Earl has come to the realization, what he thought he wanted was to get Johnny to cross him off or let Johnny, cross him off the list. But he's never going to be able to do that. And so what Earl finally realizes is he was putting himself in front of Johnny. He was driving a man to the point of suicide for his own feeling good about himself. And so ultimately, Earl has to fail at this goal. And so he ends up showing up to Johnny and just coming by and playing along with it. And he gives him a big hug. And of course, Johnny's confused. He thinks someone broke in the night before and beat him up or something. He can't remember what happened. But Earl basically has to tell us in VO, it's like, I had to basically learn in this case, sometimes you got to learn to forgive yourself, not get forgiveness from other people. And that is one of my last little lessons in all this is hero, obstacle, goal. Your hero can fail at that goal. And often in grown-up things, they do fail at that goal. And they discover it's not what they want, it's what they needed. And in this case, Earl needed to learn, I have to forgive myself for some things. And that's a moment of growth for him. So that's the end of our show. There's nothing else for Earl to do now. There's nothing else for Joy to do. Her story, that's the last time you saw Joy, I think, is once she basically made her point. And Randy, in the middle of that thing, I think finally ripped a label off a beer, like right at that final stunt thing. And so everything is tied up. And every one of them followed their own hero, obstacle, goal the entire way. So that's my spiel. I hope you internalize this. I'll say it again and again. Last year, my comedy group, I think, wanted to drown me by the amount of times I said hero, obstacle, goal. And in my first year, they bought me little temporary tattoos with that drawing on it. So, so that's basically the half-hour structure and how my wife and I build it out. And it's something we check in on also when something isn't working. If it feels flat, we'll go back and say, wait a minute, where did it dip in hero, obstacle, goal? And I was on a 5-hour Zoom today with the bouncy lamp people, and we were talking about that. Like, why is it dipped here? What's the goal? Who dropped the goal? Where's the obstacle? So that's my skeleton key bit for you. And scene.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so if you're listening to this and you're tired of hero, obstacle, goal, guess what? We're going to talk about it some more because, as John said, it's a technique and a structure that is true for all stories. So what I'm going to do is talk about TV drama structure. I'll go into a little more detail on some things that are different in terms of structuring a 1-hour drama show. And then I will do a walkthrough of an episode of The Handmaid's Tale, kind of scene by scene to kind of illustrate that. I have worked in 1-hour drama pretty much my whole TV career. Before that, I was a game designer. So the whole idea of hero or player, goal, obstacle is very part of game design as well. I've worked on both shows that were a little more episodic, where they had a problem of the week to be solved. Eureka and Alphas on the Sci-Fi Channel were shows like that, as well as more serialized shows where there may be a question of the episode, but the episodes do kind of hang together over a season with a little more overall shape to it. The 100 is one of those, The Handmaid's Tale, and I'm currently working on a new project with J.J. Abrams for HBO, which is going to be serialized. So just the top level overview. I do not have a very cool multimedia presentation. I have a couple of slides which seem very janky in comparison to John's John's artwork. But before we get into that, just an overview. So as we said before, you have your main character, you have your hero. They have a goal and they must overcome obstacles to reach it. And what I find really helpful, and this really fits in with what John was saying, is before you start breaking the episode, and this is something we did on Handmaid's Tale, something we're doing now on this other project, is really asking, what does the character want? Just a quick aside that your mileage may vary. All your wonderful mentors have different experiences and techniques, so make sure you ask them in their breakout groups if they have things they do differently. But these are approaches that that have worked for me that I find hopefully useful for you as well. So what does the character want? So when you're looking at your episode, the episode will have a question that will be solved by the end. So an episode questions have solutions. So they're questions with answers. So on a medical show, can the doctor save the patient? Or on a cop show, who is the killer and will the detective catch the killer? On Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the question was, will Buffy defeat the murderous demon or vampire of the week? On Breaking Bad, an example would be, how will Walter White survive his run-in with this very dangerous drug lord? And on Handmaid's Tale, an episode question would be, will June be able to give birth to her baby in safety? So those are questions that kind of get tackled each episode. Now there's also another layer that are questions of the series itself, the questions of the entire series. And those questions ideally don't lead to solvable answers, they lead to processes, except for pure procedural. So for instance, kind of the overall question of the Buffy the Vampire series is, how does Buffy, this teenage girl, how does she balance her duty as the Slayer with her desire to be a normal teenager with a normal life? Those two things are going to be always in conflict through the whole life of the series. On Breaking Bad, you have Walter White. So how does he reconcile his life as a ruthless criminal, basically, with his role as a loving suburban dad? So every episode of Breaking Bad, you can see those two tensions kind of pulling at each other. On Handmaid's Tale, a serious question would be, how does June manage to hang on to humanity as she is trying to survive in a world that's very violent and very oppressive? And again, that gets tested and challenged for every episode. So all three of these things you can see are they're struggles, but they're all located in the heart of the main character. So ideally, each episode should speak to that serious conflict as well as whatever the challenge, the problem of the week is. So in terms of structure, and again, this is not dissimilar to what John was saying about half hour, most dramas tend to be a teaser and 5 or 6 acts. And that tends to be for episodic or basic cable. On streaming and premium cable, you may not have explicit act breaks. On Handmaid's Tale, because Hulu has this ads or no ads package, it was a teaser in 4 acts, but we actually didn't add the act breaks kind of until writing the script stage. We didn't add them when we were breaking the episode. And those often moved around in editing and post-production. So with premium cable and streaming, as John mentioned, often, in fact, commonly, you will not have explicit acts, but usually you can detect an internal rhythm, and sometimes a room will break them. Like, they won't mark them as act breaks, but you're like, what is the act 1 of this episode? What is the act 2 of this episode? That internal rhythm, and I'll go into why this is useful, you should be able to detect that rhythm. If it's just a thing that happens and a thing that happens and a thing that happens, it's going to feel flat because it's not going to be doing the escalation and the heightening that John was talking about. As you mentioned, act breaks are super important no matter what format, half hour, 1 hour that you're doing. Then those are the moments that end each act. And on broadcast and in olden days, they kept people tuned in over the commercials. But also that kind of up and down rhythm, that's how humans enjoy narrative. We like those ups and downs. We like those reversals and those complications. So you think about someone, a friend who's like really good at telling stories. It's not just, and then that happened, and then that happened, and then that happened. There's always the twists and the turns and the reversals of expectations. In terms of act breaks, people I'm sure are writing all kinds of different things. I really suggest that everyone who's interested in 1 hour drama, try writing at least one script that has act breaks explicitly, whether it's a spec in an existing show or your own pilot, because it's really, really good practice to see if you really understand that structure. Because even if you're writing like a feature style or streaming cable 1 style where you have no explicit act breaks, people reading it will be able to sort of see, does this person understand how to have the flow of an hour of TV? And then when people are reading scripts, executives or showrunner types, looking at the act breaks is like one of the first things that we do is can this person really land the act break? Let's go into a little bit of what that act structure might be like. So I will attempt some screen sharing. So there is a writer and show creator named Jeffrey Lieber. He is on Twitter, and he has what he calls the rules of show running. And he's great to follow because he has all these little rules of show running. But one of the ones he did that I thought was kind of interesting was basically the act structure via interjections. So the teaser is cool. Act 1 is wow. Act 2 is, well, fuck or frack, depending if you're a Battlestar Galactica fan. Act 3 is what? Act 4 is aha. And the tag or Act 5 is wait, really? Or phew. And I'll go into what those all mean. So the teaser, that can be the cold open, as John mentioned. This is where you typically introduce your characters and your world, and you tease the main conflict of the episode, whatever it may be. Depending on the show, this teaser can involve your characters, or sometimes it's a cold open involving other characters. So you think back to the show House, which is a really, really good show to look at in terms of understanding a well-structured 1 hour. It feels a little dated now, but at the time it was just a great example of that. So in the opening of House, that's where the patient of the week would collapse. He was not usually in the teaser, but that's how the show would open. In the cop show, that's where the dead body is found. Act 1 is where you get the story rolling and you develop that central conflict further. So we, the audience, learns and the characters learn what is the problem that's going to be solved in this episode. Act 1 is also usually where you kick off the B story. So what's a B story? Again, most TV shows have them, not all of them do. One of the interesting things about The Mandalorian on Disney Plus is there is no B story. You're just with The Mandalorian and what he's doing the entire time. It's a little bit more like a feature in that sense. A B story is, forgive me if you've already covered this in the series, but it's the secondary plot. On Handmaid's Tale is usually the flashbacks counted as a B story, and you might have a C story as well, but you usually want to get all those rolling in the first act. And Act 1 needs to end with a really solid cliffhanger or a big change in the hero's state towards getting their obstacle. And it's a very important, probably the most important act of the show. Act 2 begins with figuring out how to deal with the problem. There's hope in Act 2, but by the end of Act 2, there's a twist or an escalation. For example, on the cop show, this is where the detectives figure out who they think the murderer is, but they find him murdered. So back to the drawing board. In Act 3, you find that the hope from Act 2 is gone. So it's kind of the all is lost act. In a medical show, this is usually where the patient starts coding. On House, the patient coded pretty much every Act 3 of every episode. On Eureka, which was a sort of sci-fi dramedy I worked on, there would be a very technical scientific solution to the crazy problem of the week. It doesn't work. It goes terribly right and makes everything worse. So you leave Act 3 with things worse than when you started, and you're very far away from the solution. In Act 4 is where, against all the odds, the characters finally start to succeed. They might often make use of something they learned early on. Ideally, they've learned from the mistakes they've learned in Acts 1 and 2, or the clues they picked up in Acts 1 and 2. On Eureka, this town full of crazy scientists, the common sense solution from the town sheriff, Carter, is what would end up having to save the day. And this is where he would come up with it in Act 4. On House, he would remember some lie the patient told, and that would allow them to get to the real cause of what was ailing the patient. And the B story can often be relevant here. If you want to weave those two stories together, Act 4 is usually where those two stories collide. So for instance, in a cop show, the detectives suddenly remember that the very cheerful old lady who they interviewed much earlier in the episode has freshly turned dirt in the garden. Oh my gosh, could she be the murderer? Then in Act 5, the different shows handle Act 5 differently. Sometimes a show will save applying that solution for Act 5, so there's still tension at the end of Act 4. You don't know if this crazy solution is going to work. And then Act 5 turns into the big finale. Other shows get to the solution in Act 4, and Act 5 is a little bit more of a wrap-up or an epilogue. You might have music playing as you check in with the various characters. And it also might be something that can set up sort of tease for the next episode. So that is a sort of a standard 5-act structure. So some nuts and bolts before I get into the Handmaid's Tale walkthrough. Length, you want it to be about 50 or 55 pages for a spec of an existing show or a show with act breaks. If you're doing an original pilot or for a cable or streaming type script, you can go up to around 62 pages. But if you're under 60, you will be the hero of everyone who reads that script. That tends to kind of people tend to nudge the page count along on original pilots. There's a little bit of leeway, but if you turn in, if I got like a 58-page original pilot to read, I'd be very excited about that. So some tips for kind of how to internalize structure and learn more about it. Read scripts. I know we're in COVID times, so I don't think the Writers Guild Foundation Library is open, but that's a great resource when it is open. You can find lots of scripts online. The other thing that is really useful to do is to watch TV, but hitting the pause button and taking notes. So what you do is you see how many scenes are there total in the whole episode, how many scenes are there per act and per storyline. And if you dissect the show you're watching that way, you get a real good sense of how that show's writers built the story and how much time they spent on different parts of the story. And I know you guys will get into this more with crafting scenes. Some tricks and tips for like kind of basically how do you actually do all this? Like it's all fine to lay the structure out, but how do you figure out like what happens in the episode? A couple of things that I found useful is really just thinking what would happen next, like really what would the character do next, and as John mentioned, finding ways to heighten that is what makes it interesting and makes it kind of lively drama. Raising the stakes, in other words. Another way to think about it, I mentioned the ups and downs earlier. If you think about fortunately, unfortunately, fortunately means there's a bit of a win for the character. They find a clue or they solve some aspect of the problem of the week. Unfortunately means it's the wrong solution. The murderer they thought was guilty has actually been murdered themselves. So that up and down, fortunately, unfortunately, is a good way to think about structuring the rhythm of the episode. And most importantly, again, this goes back to the hero obstacle goal, is character is really everything. Character has a problem, and ideally the story is the solution. So I'm going to now, let's see, go over, I again apologize for the kind of janky graphics here. I'm going to go and pull up, all right, you're going to see how the sausage gets made here. These are cards for an episode of The Handmaid's Tale. And it's not one you need to have seen. It's for an episode called Holly. And just briefly, the setup is that June, our lead character, she is 9 months pregnant. In the previous episode, she was stranded alone in the dead of winter at this closed up summer house deep in the woods. And she lives in a very dangerous, oppressive world that she completely hates. And freedom for her right now is just a dream. So when we're thinking of this episode, what does she want? What June wants is she's about to give birth. She wants to give birth to her child in safety. But you'll see over the course of the episode, her tactics will change. So what safety means will change, but the goal remains the same, having her child in a place that's safe. All right, so let's do the screen sharing. Okay. All right, so these are the episode cards for the episode Holly of the Handmaid's Tale. So when the episode starts, we have Alfred. She's been abandoned. She needs to get her bearings. She's looking around this abandoned house. She's completely alone, but she does see a garage. She goes to the garage and she peeks in the window and, oh my gosh, there's a car. That's some good news. Unfortunately, also in the woods is a wolf. She sees a wolf on her way back to the house. It says draws strength on the card, but actually ended up more playing like something's dangerous. It's not going to be easy for her to get back to that card. So she now has a goal. She has a car. She wants to give birth to her child in safety. That does not mean staying here. She's going to get the hell out of here. So when Act 1 starts, she's looking for the keys. So she finds the keys in the house. And the other thing that happens is the complication here is an emotional complication. She's alone. She'll have some unexpected visitors a little bit later. But right now the complication is the realization that if she leaves, what she's planning to do, she's going to drive north to Canada. She's going to escape this place. Her other daughter, her 8-year-old daughter, who is still in this world, she will never see her again. So she gets the keys, but it costs her a very painful memory of her daughter. So that's where it says written down here, says school drop off. So she grabs a kitchen knife. The wolf is still out there. The keys work. She gets into the garage. The car starts. Fuck yeah, she's going to get out of here. So that's a big kind of win for the end of Act 1. You think she's going to get out of there. But not so fast. So this is where you kind of get into what would she do next. Some people could say, well, she just gets in the car and drives away. We want her to be smart about it. She is about to give birth. She doesn't know where or when she's going to be able to have supplies again. So she takes a moment and is smart about it. She grabs food, she grabs water, she grabs first aid kit. She takes all that stuff out to the car, ready to go, except she realizes when she sees herself in the reflection of the windshield, she still looks like a woman. She looks like a handmaid who's a character in this world who should not be driving a car. She's not done yet. So she has to go back to the house. And again, remember, the wolf is out here this whole time. She goes to the house. She searches for basically a disguise. She looks for man's clothes, a man's coat. This is another chance for a flashback where she remembers her husband, Luke, who is waiting for her ideally if she is successful in escaping. She hears a noise outside. There's a car. Someone's here. It's not just anyone. It is the people who have been imprisoning her for the last year. It's the commander and Serena Joy. And that is a big twist and complication. They are coming here looking for her. So that's about the worst possible thing that could happen to her. And when we were working on this episode, we always knew that we wanted someone to surprise her here and kind of get in the way of her leaving. And we played with a lot of different options of who this could be. Was it the neighbors? Was it, some kind of security patrol? But to Dawn's earlier point about really heightening the stakes and really making those, making the goal and the obstacles as hard and as powerful as possible, we thought, who are the people she would like to see least in this situation? And it is these two people. So of course, that's what we, the writers, make happen. So they arrive there, and that is the end of Act 2. In Act 3, it almost plays like a horror movie. The commander and Serena search the house, calling for Alfred, looking for her. You think you're going to find her because Serena locates part of her clothing, the clothing that she was discarding to disguise herself, but she doesn't find Alfred. Meanwhile, we have Alfred. She's hiding in the attic, and she's eavesdropping on this scene between Serena and the commander, and they're having a complete knockdown, drag-out verbal fight. While she's up there, she finds a shotgun and some shells. And that obviously raises the tension hugely. What is she going to do with this gun? So as Serena and the commander have it out, Alfred very quietly, very tensely loads the gun, and we see her take aim down through this atrium at the couple. Is she going to shoot Serena? Is she going to shoot Fred? That's the question. And in the scene, she hesitates. And she loses her shot and they leave. And this gets to, as you can see from my terrible handwriting here, my squiggle here, that gets to the theme, the serious question that I mentioned earlier. The show has been about, can Alfred can June hang on to her humanity when the world she's in makes that very, very difficult? And in this moment, she hangs on to her humanity. She does not shoot them, she does not kill them, although she could. Interestingly, the character has evolved season over season. And I think season 3 and later, June would absolutely have taken this shot. She would have shot them dead. It'd be a very different show at that point. All right, so that's a really good bit of news. They leave. She drives away. She thinks, thank God, they're gone. I'm safe. No one else is looking for me. I have the car. I have my supplies. That's when her labor starts. So that means she has to hurry. The baby's going to start coming. And this is where we have another flashback where she thinks back to the birth of her first child. We see a bit of a relationship with her mother that's kind of tense. She comes out of that, and that's when we go into Act 4. Her realizing that her time is limited. So she gets to more limited than she realized it was. There's a ticking clock now. You hear that a lot with episodic dramas, with the ticking clock. So at the top of Act 4, she makes her last attempt to get out, but she can't. The garage door is warped from the cold. She can't get the car out. She's trying to pull the door open, and she slips and falls. It's a very scary moment, and the wolf is there. The wolf is just watching. The wolf has sort of changed more to a bit of a, now the wolf is something that she can draw strength from. Her water breaks, and because this is her second child, that means that she probably has maybe 45 minutes max before the baby comes. So she knows she's not going anywhere. She's going to have to stay here at this house and have birth all by herself out here in the middle of nowhere. So this next card at the bottom of the third column is struck out because we decided we didn't need it. We already had one gathering supplies scene, which is in Act 2 where she's getting ready to leave. This just seemed like too repetitive, so we actually ended up cutting that. And you cut right into her in front of a fire that she's built in labor. And it's not easy. She has no anesthetic. She has no one else with her. It's a very painful, hard labor. In fact, there's something wrong. Something must have happened when she fell, and she has a very painful contraction, and she passes out. While she's passed out, she has another flashback of the last time she was in labor, where it was completely opposite. She wasn't alone. She had her family, she had her friends, she had doctors, she had epidurals, she had everything she doesn't have here. And when she comes to, she realizes that she is bleeding badly. She's bleeding out. She might lose her daughter. Well, she might lose her child. She hasn't a girl yet. She cannot risk her child dying, or her dying, and therefore her child with her. So she drags herself out of the house into the snow, and she has the gun. And for a minute, you don't quite know what she's going to do with the gun. The wolf is there again, watching her. And what she does is she fires into the air, knowing that's going to summon somebody. Someone will hear it. You know, the neighbors will hear that and will hopefully come with her. She's taking the chance. She's taking a leap of faith that someone will find her and take care of her, because she knows she can't do it alone. She's given up on the dream of freedom in exchange for the safety that she knows other people coming to help will bring. So then the wolf runs off. Because she's giving herself back to civilization, the wolf is going back to the wilderness. And then we have a montage where she's giving birth to her child. She remembers scenes from the previous time that she gave birth. It also includes some of the memories of her training in the Red Center, which is this horror place where she learned what it meant to be a handmaid. And it works. You know, she's successful. She gives birth to her baby. The baby is safe. She names her Holly. She bundles up with her. And then she just needs to hang on until she knows that someone is coming. And that's the last moment of the episode. Is you see headlights sweeping across the front room of the house, and you end on June Offred and her baby, and she knows that she did it. You know, she gave birth to her baby on her own. Even though it means her freedom, she did what she needed to do to have her child in safety. So yeah, so that is an episode of The Handmaid's Tale, and that's the end of my piece.
Thank you, Kara. That was awesome. So we're gonna go ahead, if it's all right with you two, I think open it up to questions. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Yes, I got to go turn an alarm off right around the corner, but
No worries. So as usual, everyone, you can submit questions in the chat. I think Yusuf has been keeping an eye on it, so if anything's come up.
Yeah, well, Avery was the first to ask a question, but I think it was specifically for John. So I guess we'll wait till John gets back to get your question answered, Avery. But anyone else has a question? Oh, wait, here he is. All right, so Avery has a question for you, John.
okay.
Oh, I have to ask it, not you?
You talk. It's your question.
Okay. I was wondering what the page breakdowns are for the sitcoms. Act 1, 2, 3. Are they like equal, about 8 pages each, or how should we aim?
Yeah, I know it depends on the show a little bit. I feel like our Earls were 34 pages. We just did this show Downward Dog. I think they were 29. We did a musical half hour that the scripts were like 21 pages because we had to have room for songs. But I feel like single camera format for production drafts, they're usually 28 or so, 29 pages. I think 30 is a magic number. That's a really good number to hit. I think 31 is good. Kira, I'm with you. It's like I've read the pile of scripts that come in, and it's like once they start getting longer, it's just, I think, human nature not to be like, oh, this is a 38-page pilot, crap. And so, yeah, I would say, and as far as breakdown, it doesn't have to be exactly, if it's 28 pages, you don't have to have 7, 7, 7, 7, it can, it's a lot of times, and we've done them where we'll have a 4-page first act, but that's rare. Usually you want to have a pretty consistent for spec, a pretty decent 7, 8 page. Somewhere in the middle, you could have a shorter act, so once you're deeper into the story. But
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that's
Thank
my
you.
answer. I'm sticking with it.
All right, Brian Mead, I think you had a question also.
Yeah, so my question is for both of you. If you thought there were any unique structural elements that go into a pilot that might not exist in a normal episode of a series, especially when you're doing world building or trying to establish this world that the show exists in.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on whether you are doing, so if you're imagining for your pilot that it's going to be a premise pilot where you're actually meeting the world and all the characters, or if it's kind of more representative of what the show would be going forward. Very often you might find a touchstone character in a premise pilot. So that's someone who is new to the world, which is a really useful character to learn what the rules are. So like Farscape, which is a sci-fi show that I loved. You're in a completely different universe, but your eyes and ears into this universe are someone who's also new to it. So you're learning what he's doing. You're learning all the rules and who's who and what's what, kind of through the eyes of that character. That definitely is a common technique. I'm trying to think of other things. John, do you have any other thoughts?
Well, I know one of the things you run into is I think people often, when they start out, think of a pilot as it's an episode of the show. But what you're trying to do with this pilot is it's a sales tool to try to get people to hire you, and and so I think you also want to think along the lines of, what do I want them to see and understand? And if it's a high concept show that takes at least this is in half hour. I've had this experience directly where you might have something where it's like, okay, well, there's this crazy setup you need, and it takes all of Act 1. In the next 3 acts, what I want to show, and this is where I mean sales tool, is what a typical episode of this show is going to be. Mm-hmm. So it's important to show, so say you go a little off-road, how you wouldn't normally do it in the pilot. You're establishing the world, the person entering the new world. You want the elements of that pilot script to be what they're buying. Mm-hmm. So that they know episode 2 is going to be, okay, well, I've met these people. You don't want to get in a place where it's like, oh, the whole pilot is about this one character who ends up, and then you, at least in the shows I've worked on, and then you end up meeting the other main characters in the tag. Like, you kind of want to get the sense of here's your show.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, yeah, if it is something that requires a bit of setup, like I've worked on things where there's a little bit of a prologue, and that would not be an element that would be in later episodes, but it's important to set it up. But completely, like, you want to spend as much time as possible with the characters you're going to be spending time with on the show, because, yeah, as John said, it's a sales tool. So if you're introducing like your cool team at the very, very end, it's really hard, certainly for people who are reading it, to get a sense of like, okay, so what is the show going to feel like next week? Am I going to be with these people who I don't really know, or is there a way to meet them earlier so I can understand kind of what the experience of watching the show is going to be like?
Well, my wife and I sold it was an hour-long pilot, and it was basically based on a friend's situation where they kind of had a Juno situation in their lives, where there was this teenager in West Virginia that was pregnant, and they were going to adopt the baby, and then they got to know the teenager, and they had this literal moment of, she needs a parent just as much as this baby does. Like, should we try to adopt her? They looked into it, and it would have been a legal nightmare, so they didn't do it. But we're like, and with this friend, we wrote this. It's like, that's a show I would like to watch. I'd like to see what happens if they could pull that off. So the first bit of that was something you wouldn't do normally, which was them journeying to get her in this out of the fish out of water for them. But really, what we really rushed to do is the rest of that episode was, now she's in with the family that she's going to live with for the rest of that episode.
The one thing I would say, just to add real quick, is if it is a world building, high concept piece, like it takes place in another planet, or is a sci-fi or fantasy thing, it's even more helpful and useful to get feedback from a reader apart from yourself, because that other person, those fresh eyes will be able to tell you, hey, I got confused here, or I wanted more information, or like, wow, you gave me the entire history of this family tree and I didn't really need that. That's someone where like, it's hard for us as the writers to kind of get outside what we put on the page. So it's great advice in general, but especially if you are setting up elements that are, it's not a modern contemporary show. It's something that is set someplace else that has more of that world building sense to it.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Zane, you want to ask your question?
Sure, yeah. John, Kira, thanks for coming out. Or being at home, I guess.
I wish I could go out.
Yeah, so I was actually gonna ask, what do you guys do to get in your like well, I didn't want to assume that you're in a happy space when you write, but like whatever your happy or sad space is, do you guys have like a way of getting in there? And also, have you found that there are anything that makes you more productive? Or are there any like things that you do in the environment you work in? Are there any daily rituals you have that make you a more productive writer?
Interesting. Do you want to go first, John?
Yeah, vodka. um, I actually, comfort in a lot of ways is very important for me when I'm writing. I have a very, it actually drives my wife crazy, but I'm very structured. Like I start at 11 a.m. and I, ideally for me, I work from 11 to 4 and I'll take a lunch break. But I kind of feel like much beyond that, I'm burning myself out. I can, if I have to, go longer, but I feel like 11 is a good spot. And so I also make sure it's the first thing of the day. This tells you my lazy schedule. It's the first thing of the day I'm doing when I'm writing. Like I want to get up, I want to have coffee, and I want to put my head into writing. I don't want to do a bunch of other stuff and then jump into writing. That's personal, but I have a hard time then getting fully immersed into it. Mm-hmm. So that's important to me. And I honestly, I have the same spot I go to all the time when I write.
Okay.
Yeah. So for me, I had a whole other career in technology before I became a writer. So my early habits were writing whenever I could. So first thing in the morning before I went to work, in the evening when I came home after work, on the weekends. I think a lot of you who have other jobs, that might be kind of how you fit your writing in. So you kind of just make it happen where you can. Left to my own devices, I also am a little more structured. I tend to be more productive in the morning. I run out of steam kind of mid-late afternoon. Something that I find really helpful, especially when starting like a new project, is just giving yourself permission to have it not be good. Like just turn off the editor voice and just kind of write the sucky version just to get it down there. It's always easier to rewrite than to write. So just if a scene is like intimidating or staring at that cursor or the blank page, like just let yourself know that it's okay for it not to be great. No one's ever going to see this version. So let it suck, and then you can make it better. A couple other little things that I do just to kind of keep the flow. If possible, I like to stop for the night, or when I stop writing for the night, when I have a good sense of what the next scene is going to be. So I already know, like, so I finish the scene. I'm like, I have a good sense of how I'm going to start this next scene or this next bit tomorrow. So I can start the next morning not feeling so like, oh, what do I do? It's like, oh, I already kind of thought of that scene, so I can start there. I think Hemingway stopped in the middle of a sentence, which sounds crazy to me. I can't do that. But I like to know what the next scene. Sorry, what?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Back to the vodka. Yeah, so that's a trick that I found useful. And also, and I'm sure you guys have done that, or we'll get into that. I'm a big believer in outlines. So the outline is where I do all my heavy lifting. I know things do change when writing, and I definitely embrace that possibility. But I never start something without knowing clearly what the thing is going to be. Like I don't kind of compose on the in final draft or whatever. Just because I know from working in TV, having that guide, basically that guide map that an outline gives you, saves you from getting stuck. Like you're not going to ever have the blank page on the script because you've done all the hard work in the outline stage. So even if it's just a very kind of rough, shorthandy version of an outline that would not make sense to anybody else but me, I always have that before I get started.
I would say that rough draft is Kat, my wife, and I call it our guerrilla draft. And it is as if a gorilla sat at a typewriter and wrote it, and it's okay. It's like, and we're big believers in outlines too, and I think it's having come up through broadcast television where it's like, you have to turn these things in. But it's like, make your mistakes, in my opinion, make your mistakes in the outline. It's a heck of a lot easier to rewrite a paragraph than realize, oh, I have a script that's got to be completely thrown out. And then I feel also, once you've got that outline and you like it, that guerrilla draft, I try to write it as fast as I possibly can, because it's not going to be the draft that I turn in. And I want to get through the draft that I'm not turning in as fast as I possibly can, so I can get to the draft that I'll eventually be turning in. Mm-hmm. And I've always felt like the biggest danger that people have sometimes is when they write that first draft, they perfect everything as they go. And in my opinion, when you're writing a script, it's kind of like, we were in Italy once and someone said Michelangelo would take a stone and he would kind of try to release what was in there. But what he would do is get the big shape, and then the next shape, and then refine, and then get to the fine details. And I feel like if you make your first scenes perfect, it's like you're making the nose perfect on the sculpture before you know what the sculpture is.
Yeah.
And you really want to leave your, and it's, once you make it perfect, it's so much harder to rewrite too. So there's something to get it out there in all of its ugly glory and then start to find what it is.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Right, Ramsey.
Hey y'all, thank you for your time. Super quick question around need and want. So Kira, for Handmaid's Tale, seems like, you know, she really wanted freedom because the environment is so hostile and, you know, rape and everything. But she just, the need is she needs to take care of her child. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, she is kind of balancing these tensions between between wanting to leave and wanting and needing to stay, basically, and also the world is so brutal. How could she kind of hold on to who she is? And that's kind of, I mean, I think that is really buried pretty deep. Like if you asked her, like, oh, do you need to hold on to who you are in your violent circumstances? She would be no. That's kind of deep character expression. So I think that's the need she may not know she has. But what she wants to do is survive. She wants to survive, and she wants to find her. So I know in features you talk a lot. One talks a lot about need versus want. Again, that's something that it's a tool that may or may not apply depending on what the project is. But nearly always, in a TV show, the main character has some kind of internal tension that cannot be reconciled, because if you reconcile that tension, then the show is over. So, you look at a show like Succession, and it's such a brilliantly written show. All those shows, firstly, it's really funny, but all those characters, they are incredibly ambitious and grasping, and yet all of them love one or more of each other in a real way. And so they're constantly fucking each other over, but they also love each other. And that will go on forever. Like you can imagine that kind of tension going on until the universe burnt out, because those things can never be reconciled.
I know in the half hour to go on is like sort of the want is what they would tell you they want while they're doing this, but then there's always that sort of moment at the end where they realize they've learned something. And I think the learned something is probably where you would kind of look for that. It's that thing that they wouldn't be able to tell you, like you're saying with Keep Your Humanity. It's like she wouldn't tell you that midway through, but by the end, that's probably what she needed more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the He-Man moment at the very end. If you guys watch that cartoon. But thank you.
It's been a long time.
Of course.
All right, Tony.
Hey guys, so just as a practical matter, Kira, I noticed you had around 4 cards per act. Is that general? And should
No.
you start going beyond that?
Yeah, yeah, well spotted. This was a fairly lean episode, and if you've watched the show, that it's not usually, it was a little bit off pattern for us because we were really just with her for the whole thing. And so there were cards that were not represented there, which were all the flashback cards. So there was probably a handful, maybe 4 or 5 more that were on there. But it was still very lean and very Spartan. I would say our average episode probably had 25% more kind of beats and scenes, because we would be visiting other characters, other storylines. So this was one of our shortest episodes. We were talking about page length. The script for this was only 30 pages long. The episode played at about 46 minutes though, because there was a lot of very visual storytelling, lots of moments where things were happening. There just wasn't dialogue for it. So yeah, this would be a very, very short standard episode. They're usually, I guess I'm just trying to think like what standard for a 1-hour drama. You might have more like 25, 30 cards, which might expand as those turn into scenes as opposed to being.
And so with the set number of beats basically, and then you would end the cards as you see fit. Maybe some are more. You have more cards per act than others, but you kind of like stay within the 30 to 35 beat kind of thing, and then as the acts end, or how they end and begin naturally, but within that kind of set
Yeah.
number.
Yeah, because I'm looking at some of these now, like the Act One has like two cards in it, which is I mean the first part is actually a whole sequence where she's searching through the house. The kitchen knife, getting to the garage, starting the car. That's actually 3 scenes, 3 sublines. So this is kind of the very shorthanded version.
Yeah.
What typically we would do for some of the younger writers is take more time and really knock it out scene by scene, so they felt supported when they went off to outline. As you kind of go through and work more, some of these techniques are more internalized, but yeah. So this is a little non-representative of what the actual scene by scene breakdown would be.
Thank you. Really great breakdown.
I just wanted to jump in and say, it's Karen here. Hi.
Hi.
Kira. I just wanted to let everybody know that Kira's, this episode was really unusual and really internal and absolutely engaging. And didn't it win you a Writers Guild Award?
This one was nominated for nominated for an Emmy.
An Emmy. Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
One of them was it was the series that got the award.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It was beautifully done, and congratulations
Thank you
again.
very much.
Yay. So Joe, you got a question?
I have a question about writing with a writing partner. And John, I think you've mentioned your wife a few times, and Kara, I'm sure you've experienced too. I'm writing a pilot for this and then another pilot with a writing partner. And we've traded notes on our work before, and we were both interested in the story, which is why we're working together. But I'm curious if you have just any general tips on like the outlining and the breaking story process, specifically with a partner.
Yeah.
And we're remote also. We're on like opposite coasts. So.
Okay. Extra challenging. You know, it's a huge part of where we got into the very detailed outline than Guerrilla Draft had to do with functioning without destroying our relationship. Because basically, when we started out, we would sit in front of the same computer and try to write out the outline. And here's the description. And it was so slow and such a slog because everybody will say something slightly different. And we wore out. I always said, like, I played a lot of video games and you have your health and your mana is where your magic comes from. I feel like we get into arguments and we'd use up all of our creativity mana in arguing over like little words. And what we ended up doing is having big conversations about the story and very much like, okay, this is what we want the outline to be. And we really battled out as much as we could in the outline form. We had a rule that we still kind of follow, and and I'm sure this isn't original, but it's we would always say it can't be my way or your way. If we disagree, then we've got to find a third way. And what that actually more than anything else taught us is if you get to that idea of like, oh God, we have to come up with another way, a lot of times one of the people will be like, you know what, you care more than I do. Let's try it your way first. And that's a big thing to learn to let go. But also sometimes that third way is going to be the thing that is the reason you're partners because you're not thinking of it. So that's a really important thing for us is that third way. But by having a very detailed outline to the point of every beat, like we really do in a scene, so-and-so enters, they talk to so-and-so. We may even have a little bit of dialogue we like. Then the rule is we split the scenes, but the other rule is you're not allowed to freelance in any form away from that outline. Like you are, and it's bad, and it's going to be bad, and it's not your fault, it's the outline's fault, and that's neither of ours, that's the outline. And so we'll come in with our guerrilla draft, but you're not allowed to go on some flight of fancy you fell in love with and then bring it in. Now the other writer's like, yeah, but I'm not really into that. And that's going to be where all your, you're trying to save wasting time on arguing. And so we found then what we do is once we combine the horrible draft that it will be, now we sit there and we've done this over Zoom because we've been in 2 different places, and we will literally now read out loud, which is very important to us, taking turns reading dialogue back and forth. And now we read a scene all the way through, even if it's the worst scene in the world, there's no quitting reading through it. It's almost like you have to take your medicine, but it's, you get through it, and now it's going to be both of yours and you're going to rewrite. And somehow that keeps you from holding on too dearly to stuff because it's not yours, it's the outlines. And then you can start actually, I think, adding and not wasting your time arguing. Those are my crucial tips. And don't work with your spouse. That's my other tip. No, I'm just kidding.
I love the idea of the third way. It's really fantastic advice. Yeah, and the only thing I just would echo is, and this gets to like, you know, taking notes as well, is that be open to hearing other ideas, because sometimes we're writers, we like what we write, and it can be hard to hear an idea that's good or improves it. So being open to that is important as a writer, and also, and this is a little different when you're kind of just working on your own or with with a peer, is something John mentioned, is being able to let stuff go. Like it's like if screenwriters and TV writers, well, all types of writers, but TV and screenwriters in particular, we're getting notes constantly from all kinds of people. So being able to love what you love and pick your battles and let go when it's not like the hill you want to die on is a really good skill to develop.
Where we're currently working is they throw stuff out all, like, what if it's on a spaceship all of a sudden when it was in a zoo? You know, and it's sort of like, well, and all of our training was like, no, it should be this. And over the last 6 months, we've learned to be like, let's try it. Why not try it? And what if it's brilliant? And frankly, that's where this brilliant stuff comes up that you would never think of. But the good stuff kind of sticks around, I feel. And if you, and while you're building a new relationship like that too, but it's free to try. And actually you might find something really special if you, like you're saying, let go, don't hold on tight. And it is such a good lesson, because once you get into the real world of getting paid, you need to learn to let go. Kira's 100% right. If you don't, it will burn you out.
Super helpful, thank you. So.
Hey, Mitch, I believe you have a question.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks so much. I was curious about rewrites and receiving notes. How do you approach rewriting? I've heard, different techniques, like write it from scratch, all that kind of stuff. But more so just like, when it's a note that kind of creates that waterfall effect. And you're like, okay, this is going to affect multiple scenes. It's not just one incident. How do you guys approach that?
You won't be surprised to hear the little tool I go back to, which I truly do after every big note. It's back to the core of what were you trying to say and what were you trying to write. And we'll go to cards a lot if we need to, so that we're kind of looking at what we like, what we can keep, is one of our big things. And a lot of times it will rip it apart and you think it's small, but then if you're being honest to the character, you realize that little thing where what they wanted was this is now 30 degrees this way. You're like, yeah, that should work. And then when you start following it through the script, you're going to start to realize actually it's affecting everything along the way. So I don't know. I think it's important to kind of go back, constantly go back to why you wanted to tell this and what you were trying to tell. And when you do that, I find notes most often make it better versus I'm going to try to keep everything the same and then just address it for a little bit of, and you may get a note that from a network where you have to do it, where you're like, I don't necessarily agree with that, but you'll end up putting it through your filter of, if you go back to basics, what you want it to be, and you'll find a way to make it a better version of what you want to be, because you're going to have to find a way around it. Gary Marshall, I saw some speech he gave, and he was talking about how in Happy Days, they used to get all sorts of like standards notes, and it would drive everybody else crazy. He's like, I love standards notes. He's like, I love it. It makes you have to be more creative. And he said that they said virgin in an episode, and the network's like, you can't say virgin. And so someone came up with, she was as white as the driven snow, then she drifted. And he was like, that's what a note will do for you if you embrace it. You'll find a better version of what you were trying to get away with.
I love that. Yeah, that sense of discovery and be, as I said before, like being open to the idea, it can be scary and disheartening, especially if it kind of unravels your whole structure. Like I think we've had the experience, a lot of us, of like, this thing that's like the end of Act 2 or end of Act 3, how about the end of Act 1? And it just undoes everything. So, John said you just got to go back to, who is what does the character want? What is the obstacle? What is the emotional journey that they're going through? And try. I mean, for me, anytime there's a big rewrite like that, and I definitely have done a bunch of those, there's a point at which it feels like I have the patient on the table and all the guts are out, and like I hope it's all going to go back together. You just got to trust that it will. But it's, again, it's knowing that point will always happen. I'm less scared now when I get to it, because like, okay, this is the scary part where I feel like I'm going to put the page back together and there'll be some organ I forgot. You just need to kind of like roll with it. And again, the other thing, and this is more like an attitudinal thing, is being able to be fearless with rewriting. To our point earlier about taking notes and having to make changes, and sometimes the steer of the network might blow up an entire episode. Being able to be like, okay, we'll do more. A friend of mine, really good writer and show creator, he's like his mantra is like, crunch all you want and we'll make more, which is a potato chip tagline from back in the day. It's our job to come up with stories, so it's not fun. It can be very disheartening. But embracing that or feeling that, kind of rolling with it, will serve you in good stead.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
A friend just gave advice. My wife's writing a novel, and another novelist gave her advice, and I think it's the greatest thing I've ever heard. And it's basically the way this woman writes a novel, and I feel like this sort of applies to what you're talking about, is she's like, I write what I really care about first. It's like, if that's the ending and I see it, I write the end of the book first because it excites me. And then I write the other part of the book I love, and then I write the other part of the book. And there's usually a few things you love, even in a big rewrite, there's a few things you love if you have to do page one. And then now you're just connecting those pieces together. You may have to change them a little bit, but the approach of writing what you care about in the script, to me, was like, why have I never done that before? I always slog my way to get to that.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway.
Well, and can I just add one thing real quick?
Hey.
Hey. To John and Kira's point, I think there always is that initial, I need to tell this story because of this moment that this character is going through, or this relationship that really just sings to my heart. And I think if you always hold on to that, that won't change. Like, that is your North Star. And if you hold on to that North Star, everything else can change, but you'll never lose focus of the heart and soul of your protagonist, which they're not wanting to change your protagonist. Otherwise they wouldn't be giving you notes. Like, whether the studio or the network, like, they've greenlit the show if you're working, or pilot. And at this point too, like, you're going to be getting notes from a lot of different people. They're not going to be aware of your North Star. So it's your job as the writer to protect it.
That's such good advice. Like, that's the thing in development. People sometimes forget, you protect that. That's the thing you fight them over, is that North Star. The other stuff can change and brush it away. Figure out what cuts away the fat, and now you're into the meat of it. Has to be. Otherwise, I've lost what I care about.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. It's all super helpful.
Okay, Ramsey has a second question.
I do. Thanks, y'all. I come from the background of production, and so I've seen how things change because of location or time, whatever. Have you experienced the script changing slightly, largely, in smaller, big productions in a short way?
Oh yes, yeah. I think every writer who's worked on something that's been in production have had that, and that's something that it's something that doesn't really get taught a lot, because it could be a fun exercise to try some of those things on your own scripts. But yeah, I mean, I definitely want to hear what John said. But I've been on shows where we lost a location, so scenes had to be rewritten like the night before to get them into the new location, or for weather, things have to get rewritten. We've had actors have to drop out, like series regulars actors have to drop out for one reason or another, and they have to get rewritten out of the episode. And sometimes the time turnaround on that can be really tight. The director is not making their days, so you have to cut 5 pages out, and they've already shot 10 pages out of your 50-page script, and those are a few examples. But yeah, production rewrites are something that absolutely always happens, and it's not something that gets taught a lot. It's definitely like a learning on the job kind of thing.
One of the things I learned to do right at the beginning was to read a board, because then when they said we need to change this, we can't get this location or that actress or whatever, then it was in my hands. I could, as a producer on the show, I could say, you know, I could work it to a way that pleased me instead of, you know, if you know how to read a board, you know how many days you have here, how many days, especially the biggest, the big rewrite before you start shooting, that final production rewrite.
Yeah.
That's where you want to really not have things fly away from you because they were just making changes based on location and stuff. If you can read the board and you know how many days it takes or how many, you know, how many shots you can get in the day, then it can help you keep your North Star where it belongs, you know, keep it intact.
Kat and I would always, like when we're running something before we go to set, we literally target what we could kill that day and get away and still have something to air.
Well, that's smart.
What's that?
There's that smart. So you find a targeted opportunity.
Yeah, and we'd always walk into that day and be like, you know what? If we got down to it poured rain and we can't finish the day, we really don't have to have this scene. And even while we're there, we're kind of constantly in that state. And I think it's because we produced this show, Gallivant in England, which was a musical comedy in castles and stuff. And we had Weird Al Yankovic for one day in an abbey that we could only get one day the entire year. And nobody told us there was a NATO summit across it of the way in Wales.
Oh no.
So we started shooting and bombers and like escort planes were going by every 5 minutes. So we had to shoot between that. And it was exactly that. We just had to start like ripping out pages and like, we got to make the episode work. And I think it scared us so much that everything after that, we always walk in with our plan. Like, what can we kill? I don't know if that's your question answered or not.
It is, exactly. Yeah, I'd be doing on location audio and we'd have planes flying over all of a sudden. And it's that thing. It's like, you know, cutting down in production. So thank you.
When you do go onto set, which you guys will do at some point, it's like the one thing was hammered into me is know your script. Like, you know every word inside and out. And actors are going to have questions. You cannot not know the answer to why every word is spoken, even if you're just assigned to be on set for that. But when you get into that zone and sort of the shit hits the fan, you're kind of aware of what you need to keep and what you don't.
And try to pretend that it matters what the director thinks too.
They're so sensitive.
Great. I think that was our last question for the night. Unless any other mentors wanted to hop in, I know we went a little bit over time here, but great discussion. Great. I think, yeah, we're going to be wrapping up. So thank you, Kira and John. That was fantastic.
Thanks
Big
so much.
silent round of applause.
You didn't get the applause machine. I thought you guys were going to get like an applause machine or something.
Never again. We've learned the mistakes of last year. Well, thank you again. This was fantastic. We're so lucky to have you both supporting the program. So for everyone else, as usual, we're going to be starting the breakout rooms. So make sure you click join before you go, you know, take a break, run over, get water, whatever. I'll go ahead and do that now. So yeah, one last thank you. And
everyone. Nice to see you. Stay healthy, stay safe.
All right, rooms are open. All right.
And then I was thinking, I'm trying to, I've been on Zoom since 9 a.m., but I wouldn't mind saying hi to everybody.
Yeah, I could totally add you.
I'll just say a quick hello. I may not be able to stay. Are you allowed to drink wine while you're on these things?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
It's part of the process.
I was only half joking about vodka.
Okay, cool. I will put you with
Like Mariana.
group 7. Yep, that's the one. All right, it should pop up now.
Okay, cool. See ya.
See ya. Three. Here you are. Is that everybody?